This is a real world conversation where we talk with experts in their field on everything from their career journeys to specific topics, obviously topics in which we educate students. And today I have with me Laura Jawad from Laura Jawad Marketing. This is her firm where she works with small businesses, helping them essentially outpunch their weight class. And so, Laura, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Sasha.
Well, we were talking through a couple of different key topics in marketing today, and the landscape is changing fast and furious. And so I thought maybe we could start at the beginning. If you could give us sort of an overview of what SEO is and what iterations of this are changing now because of Gen AI, and I've heard geo, I've heard geneo, I've heard 15 different words to describe how do you show up in a Gen AI overview or how are you recommended. So why don't we start with what is SEO?
Yeah. So until very recently, the quick definition I would give is SEO is the art of getting Google to serve up your website in response to a relevant search query. Now I've modified that. And I'll say that SEO is the art of showing up, getting referred wherever your searchers are searching. Okay,
Right.
Because SEO is now not just about Google, but it's also about showing up in AI overviews and getting recommended by AI answer engines. And yes, there's tons of acronyms like alphabet soup. The ones that I would say have risen to the top in terms of what I see over and over again, I think the biggest one is GEO, the generative engine optimization. To some extent, I see AEO, which is answer engine optimization. And then occasionally I'll see people use SEO as search experience optimization. I don't really think it matters what you call it. And I also don't think that there are really like two different things.
Right.
And so I actually, for a little while, thought teaching AI answer engine optimization as like a separate skill.
Right.
Because foundationally, they're not that different. But it's what people want. It's what people are asking for. And so it's convenient to talk about them as two different things.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we work with AI like it's going out of style, right? I think we are always experimenting with the next thing that AI can help us with, especially in marketing. And one of the things that I found interesting / ironic about working with Gemini on this is when I say something like, give me a meta description that will optimize this to show up in X, Y, and Z for geo, it immediately goes to like a geographic answer. So I actually have to, for AI, spell out like Gen AI overviews, which I think is hysterical. But what are some of those key, if they're not really separate things, key points that are important for those Gen AI or AEO or geo or whatever we want to call it? What are some of the key things that are really important there?
So some of the things that are really important there are becoming more and more important for traditional Google search as well. And people who aren't in it every day might just not realize it. So there are things like brand reputation. Brand reputation matters more and more, which essentially means that these engines are looking not only at your website, but at the entirety of your online footprint. All of the places where you show up, where you're mentioned, where you're reviewed. And they're using that to build a complete picture of your credibility and your expertise and your authority. And so the website isn't enough. We have to look at the whole footprint. In addition to that, there's optimizing for authority. So really becoming a topical authority, not just, you can't just publish content like breadth doesn't win anymore. It's really about going deep into focused topics and sort of winning those topics. And that matters for Google and it matters for and it matters for answer engines. Things that are different. I think it's important to understand or to really articulate like how the two systems are different, because Google ranks pages and AI answer engines rank passages. And so in terms of optimizing specifically for AI beyond these things that are good for Google anyway, like building your brand reputation, creating a content strategy that prioritizes like depth and topical authority, optimizing around extractability is really, really important. So the way that you structure your content on the page, the way that you answer questions quickly and concisely underneath a heading, right? And then SEO fundamentals, like making sure your page is fast, because LLMs prioritize retrievability, right? So the hybrid LLMs that are going beyond their training sets, that are going to the open web, they're not going to wait around for a slow page. Stuff's got to be really, really snappy. So again, it's SEO fundamentals, right? They just matter for a different reason now.
Right. Interesting.
So yeah, so again, this is why it's hard for me to say, oh, these are the things that you do just for LLMs, right? Because a lot of them are important anyway. I would say the biggest difference really is this idea of like chunking your content and being really intentional about optimizing passages, which is still going to read nicely for humans, and it's still going to play well with Google. But that is a slight shift. And so things like listicles and, FAQs in terms of blog content, those are doing really, really well because that content by its nature is just chunked really nicely.
Right. Now, in terms of, I was actually asking one of my favorite AI friends the other day, not actually a friend, I would consider this AI to be a colleague, but about those chunks, how essentially everything is more about answering the question, but there's it seemed to me there was like a theme of proper nouns. Instead of saying things like we do, starting with Newstate University does, like answering the question with that sort of like noun front and center, or the answer can't be in the paragraph. It's supposed to be like at the top of the paragraph. Like if there was one thing about chunking that you would recommend to people, what would that be?
Use your headlines and subheadlines correctly. That's number one. And then answering the question towards the top of the paragraph, and then using the rest of the content there to expand on it. I think you have to be so careful. And this is one of my favorite topics, Sasha, is to talk all about how LLMs can't be your SEO strategist. They just don't know what it means. So when you're asking them to optimize something, like they don't know what it means. If you were to start all your content with Newstate University, blah, 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 it would be it would be like such a poor experience for actual people.
Absolutely. Yes.
Right. And so you don't want to do that.
Right.
But the idea of answering questions earlier, that's definitely valid.
Yeah.
And in that answer, really defining semantic relationships is valuable. So, naming the thing, who it's for, what the benefit is, like making sure that sentence is really clear, as opposed to like a lot of AI generated text in particular will have these fluffy, like,
oh, I hate that.
Terrible first sentences that are meaningless. That's a wasted opportunity. Like being really careful, like to come out of the gate from that sub headline and answer the question immediately, and then provide supporting information is really, really valuable.
Yes, the fluff is a problem for real. And so much of this stuff also comes down to quality assurance, right? Like the AI isn't your human, as much as I joke about it being a colleague.
Yeah.
It is a helper, right? It is a helper. So tell me more about semantic relationships. I'm just fascinated.
Well, I think it's this idea that you were just mentioning, right? but it's in the execution. So instead of saying, starting every sentence with Newstate University is blah, 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 but in answering your questions, including recognizable entities, right? Like Google cares about entities. So something relating it to something that Google understands, and explaining what that is, who it's for, and what the benefit is. For example, like making it really clear what the relationship of this entity is to whatever else it is that you're talking about. Like that's especially with blog content, training the engines to understand your relationship to these entities is one of the, I'm stumbling over this a little bit, but the big benefits, right, of your top of funnel, like the long form content, is really establishing these relationships. And so being sure in those like quick answers to really explain why we're talking about this thing.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. If you were providing one piece of advice for someone who has always been in the SEO world, which is like, this evolving, say you had mentioned that some of the core best practices are still sort of those core best practices, but really it is evolving to some extent. What do you think is that one of the key distinctions or key components of that evolution? Like what do you think is truly more distinct as things evolve?
So I'm probably going to ask for some clarification here.
Yeah.
So I mean, the main difference I see is what I mentioned earlier, like that, optimizing for like passages versus optimizing the entire page, right? That does change things quite a bit. Are you asking for something different?
No, I was just really thinking of like if someone was living in the SEO world of 3 years ago and they just woke up from a long nap, what would be like one of those key differences? And it sounds like it is what you've already mentioned.
If someone was waking up from a 3-year slumber, what I would tell them is that the focus now, whether we're talking about SEO or geo, is, 3 years ago, it was more on keywords. Now it is more about context and relevance. 3 years ago, it was more about backlinks. Now it's more about reputation and authority. And so it's to say that it's all the more important now that you're creating really high quality. I mean, it's always been important that you're creating high quality content, but more and more every day, that is important. Creating a body of knowledge that shows depth in your area where you want to be known as an expert, and then building a reputation around that. So getting yourself onto platforms where people are talking about you, where you're providing guest information, things like this, right? Where you're showing up as the expert, and it has to tie back to those things that you're trying to build expertise for on your website. Right. But it's no longer enough to just go write an article and stuff it with keywords and maybe get like a few like random links back to it. The ecosystem is a lot richer now.
Now, where does brand fit into this? So if you have an established brand versus a new brand, like what is that relationship between brand and authority?
So it's going to depend where you're trying to show up. Both Google and LLMs favor recognizable brands now.
Right.
And you can see that every time you go search for any sort of generic keyword, running shoe, Nike's going to come up first, just as an easy example. So brand authority matters a lot. For small brands, they can still do well. Part of the SEO strategy is finding the field that they're going to compete on, right? So I am not competing for SEO audits, right? No one's ever going to find my website for SEO audits. It's too big, right? And there's agencies that are much bigger than me, like Neil Patel's going to show up. But I'm doing really, really well right now for done for you SEO, because I found like this longer tail, less common keyword, right? And I made a well-optimized page around it, and I'm building out long-form content that establishes my authority around that. And I'm getting out into the world and talking about it and sending links back to the website, right? So small brands can still do really, really well, but you have to be more strategic about what you're trying to compete for. There's an element of creativity there.
Yes.
But in terms of just like, we call them head keywords in SEO speak, these very generic words or phrases, usually one or two words. The big brands are going to win those.
Yeah, you're never going to win as the little guy.
You're never
online university.
Yeah. And at the same time, you can be as like creative and selective as you want, finding like the perfect, like longer tail niche keyword. But if all you do is slap up a website with 5 pages on it, it's never going to rank, because you don't look like an expert with 5 pages on a website.
Right. Well, that is awesome advice. I love how you just delineated. I should have just started with that question about if you just woke up from 3 years ago. Super helpful. Really appreciate it. And this is sort of what you do all day, every day, right? You help smaller brands make it happen.
And I think it is super fun, because the number of ways that a human can search for a particular solution or service is infinite, right? And it's easy to think of that really common phrase, but inevitably, like, our brains are so weird and diverse, and there's so many ways to search for something, and finding that sweet spot of, maybe the lower popularity of a term, but still the high accuracy and alignment it's a neat puzzle, right? And then figuring out how to build up that authority and credibility around it.
I love it. I feel like I've learned so much today. Thank you, Laura. And thank you for being one of our guests here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sasha.